welcome to Koshian Cast, the weekly sports anime fan podcast. My name is Matt, and joining me today is a very special guest, Matt.
Hey!
Hey, so we are here to do our final series reviews for Teekyu and its two spin-off series, Takamiya Nasuno Desu and Usakame. So we're managing to cover 10 seasons of anime in one brief review, but that's mostly because these episodes are between 2 and 3 minutes long each, and there's 10 or 12 episodes per season, so you can get through a season in about a half hour. These things end up moving quite quickly.
Right. We kind of spaced it out week to week. You can really get through this in an afternoon, though.
Yeah, it might not be advisable, though, but we'll get into that.
We'll get into that, yeah.
So we just started TQ at the beginning of this past season because it was something that had been out there. We had wanted to do it in the fall, but there was just too much going on. So we finally got around to it this winter because, at least in name, it's a sports anime and that it's about a girls' tennis team, and we didn't want to let that go unaddressed.
Right.
So what were your expectations for the show before you got into it?
I really didn't have any sort of expectations to it. I kind of just figured there'd be a bunch of jokes I wouldn't get, and just sort of left it at that. Honestly, I was kind of taken aback by the fact that these were like 2-minute episodes, without realizing that the kind of shorter anime series has actually been kind of a thing for a while now. Because I only recently got back into the anime game. Mm-hmm. And so, it's like, I didn't realize that there were so many shows that were going for, like, shorter seasons, and apparently TQ was actually, kind of a trendsetter in that regard. It was actually kind of one of the original, like few-minute-long episodes.
Yeah. Yeah, I was pretty confident I wouldn't get it, and I would just sort of endure it. I was doing this mostly for a sense of obligation, because we said we were going to do TQ in the fall, and then we just didn't, and so we decided, this is the time we do it. And luckily I ended up enjoying it a lot more than my obligation, would make me think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was kind of it was always a bit of a unknown for me. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it too much, and that one episode I had caught when we were thinking about doing it, I was pretty confused by it, to be honest.
Well, yeah, that's the thing that happens when you start in season 8.
Yeah, true enough. And this is a series that has, you need to jump into it from the beginning.
Right. So the essential premise, insofar as there is one from the beginning,
right,
is that a high school first year named Yuri decides to join her school's tennis team. And there are 3 second years already in the club, named Konoe, Nasuno, and Marimo. So Konoe is this very tiny, pink-haired, insane person. Nasuno is a taller brunette who is extremely rich, and Marimo is an extremely tall girl with long blue hair who enjoys eating underpants, among other things. And so Yuri ends up playing the straight man to sort of all 3 of them. And so notionally it's about the tennis team, but mostly it's just unrelated adventures and quirky jokes across a whole spectrum, and they tie in more characters from the school, more characters from their personal life, and just try to make a disjointed but always surprising and funny comedy. And over the years, as they've produced these things, one short season at a time, they've managed to do 2 spin-off shows. The first is called Takamiya Nasuno Desu, which is essentially it's a season of TQ, but it's just focused on treating Nasuno as the main character and more focused on her very strange personal life. And then the second spin-off, Usakame, is about a rival quote-unquote rival tennis team that has been brought up in TQ itself before, and it's a very different approach. It's much less insane. It's, sort of softer colors, a slower tone, and more of a slice of life story, but within the TQ universe.
Right. So you kind of touched on this during the summary there. A lot of TQ is really meant to be an excuse for whatever weird, twisted gag the animators come up with. The series has this strange dynamic where none of the girls by themselves, or with any of the other, like, with any of the other, like, side characters, it doesn't really work too well.
Yeah.
When the girls are like that. But when the girls are together, and that's pretty frequent. Like, it's not as if, though, that they're not generally together. I mean, the show really works there.
Yeah.
Which is odd, because really, the strength of the show comes from its, like, general, like, delivery, essentially. It comes from the pacing, because jokes come at you so fast that no matter, like, if a joke falls flat, you don't have to worry about it. It's like, there'll be another gag in about 5 seconds. Like, I'm not even exaggerating there. Like, everything just comes at you at just a spitfire pace. And that largely, I think, works. It's really what I think makes the series, is that it was also one of the, like, it makes sense to me that how this was one of the originators of this type of format, because it kind of makes a case for it, because it kind of helps keep everything condensed so that there's really no, like, there's really almost no time to register anything that happens.
Definitely. Yeah.
But it's interesting in that regard, because the girls play off each other so well. I kind of mentioned this in our weekly episodes, but it does kind of remind me a little bit of the Marx Brothers in that regard, where when you've only got one Marx Brother playing off other characters, it doesn't really work quite so well. But when you've got them working together, that's where, like, when they're playing off one another, that's really where it's strong.
Yeah, I agree. And that's sort of what makes the spin-off series somewhat less successful. Particularly Takamiya Nasuno Desu, which uses the same characters and the same world and the same pacing, but for most of the show only features Nasuno and a couple other characters that are more focused on for that. So the best episodes of that season are when all 4 TQ girls are there. But it really doesn't stand on its own as well. And the same thing, unfortunately, is true with Usakame. Usakame isn't really sure what it is as a show. It's trying to be a slice of life and a zany comedy, but a more low-key zany comedy. So the best thing about the show, and the thing you end up remembering the most, is the couple episodes where the TQ girls happen to show up, because they add so much in terms of comedy that just isn't there on its own. Usakame is trying to build this cast of characters, but it only has 12 episodes, and it's trying to introduce and develop 8 or 9 characters, and it doesn't work because the show wants you to care about them. But it's impossible to care about people that fast, so it feels like it's kind of trying to trick you.
And it's still kind of trying to go for that sense of humor from TQ, but
it doesn't go all the way. Yeah,
it doesn't go all the way. It feels a lot more gentle. And it's like, it's lacking a lot of that punch that comes from just the rapid delivery. At the same time, though, I do think it has more of a place than Nasuno, or than the Takamiya Nasuno spinoff.
Yeah.
Just because, like, that really could have just been its own season. Whereas, at the very least, I appreciate the fact with Usakame, they did at least try to do something a little differently.
Yeah, whether or not it landed.
It feels more justified as a spin-off, even if it doesn't really work.
Right, because one of the issues with Usakame is that it believes too much in the world it's creating. It's trying to create a real school with real girls having real feelings. Whereas TQ, so Usakame is trying to do that over one very short season. TQ doesn't do any of that over 8 seasons. It doesn't take itself seriously at all. It doesn't really hold to any continuity of characters or circumstances, and that's what makes it work in large part.
Right, exactly. Like, oftentimes they can use that, just they can work off of that, like making characters like suddenly die, and then how do they come back? They just decided to come back. Whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, they just survive through willpower. Whatever. Nobody cares.
Well, it's the same as their frequent breaking of the fourth wall, where they advertise their own Blu-rays in the anime, or they beg for someone to renew their anime in the last episode of each season. Right. But it works because the show doesn't pretend like these are real girls at any point.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it gets kind of weird in Usakame, because it's like because it's supposed to take place in the same world as TQ, but it seems like there's like an actual world there, like it's a little bit more realistic, and it doesn't make in a weird way, its connection to TQ kind of hurts it. Yeah,
I agree. One of the things I just want to reemphasize is just how insane the pacing is with this show. It goes 0 to 60, so like you said, with jokes that don't work, that also goes for episodes that don't work. There's a lot of episodes that may not land, but you'll just forget them because they're 2 or 3 minutes long, and you can move it on and focus on some of the good ones. But before we talk about some of our favorite episodes, I am curious whether you think this counts as a sports anime. We did review it on a sports anime podcast, but at this point, I'm not sure.
Yeah, to me, it's akin to series like episode. Like a great example of this would be in Full Metal Panic, Fumofu.
Right.
Like it has It has like the rugby episode.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, that serves as a parody of sports anime. Would I call Full Metal Panic Fumofu a sports anime? I would not, clearly. Mm-hmm. And I would kind of go with that with TQ, even though the premise is rooted in tennis. Tennis has so very little to do with anything that happens in this series.
Well, right. And a lot of the episodes where they actually utilize sports, they're poking fun at the sports anime genre.
Right. But it's like, I wouldn't call the series a parody of sports anime.
Right.
It just so happens to have sports parody-related episodes.
But it parodies a lot of things, so it's not exclusive to sports anime. So seeing as there's 8 seasons of the core show out, what would you say is the best way to watch it? Should you just marathon it all at one time, or what?
No,
what would you recommend?
I would say this series is akin to a Sugar Rush, in that it's really fun in small bursts, but if you try and take in too much at once, you're gonna get a headache.
Yeah, I agree.
And you're going to probably feel sick afterwards.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There were times, because I'm not good at pacing out my week for this show, where I would have to frantically watch a whole season of TQ right before we recorded. And sometimes it was kind of miserable, because it goes by in a blur, and if you're not in the mood for it, it really doesn't always work, and 12 episodes at a time can be a lot. So I would personally recommend watch a couple at a time when you're in the mood for it, and if you feel like you're still enjoying it, just keep watching. But don't feel like you have to sit down and watch a whole season at once, or certainly not the whole show at once. Just watch it. Say I'm gonna watch 2 or 3. Watch 2 or 3 and see how you feel.
Treat it like a nice cake. You cut yourself a slice, and you cut yourself a small slice, and then you kind of see where you go from there.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, you don't want to have too much, because then it ends up being a waste of cake and a waste of your time. But so overall, there are a few episodes that sort of rise to the top.
Right.
So I wanted, before we close out and give our final thoughts, I wanted to go through and list 10 of our favorite either episodes or 2-episode arcs, because they do have a couple connected episodes throughout this show. So if we could go through 10 and just go back and forth to
Right.
give some people, because again, it can be overwhelming how big the show is. I might recommend just watching the first season, and then if you're not sure if you're into it, just skip around to some of the highlights, and we'll go through
Right.
some of those from the rest of the show.
So I think one of the better ones, I think really when the show was starting to hit its stride was in season 2. One of the better episodes from there was the Sports Fest episode. It had a very memorable moment. So there was a recurring joke with Nasuno's father being Colonel Sanders, and he finally got his big line in the episode, which was
Right. Yeah. Just UH.
just does and then it just immediately cuts to another person talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where the frantic pace works, because if there had been too much of a pause after that, it would have been too on the nose, but the fact that it's a fraction of a second and then followed immediately by someone else talking is, just an example of how this show is effective.
Exactly.
The next one for me is also from the same season. It's the baseball team invasion arc. At least that's what I call it. It's episodes 21 and 22 when the high school baseball team destroys the tennis court and then invites the tennis team to play baseball to decide who gets the tennis court.
Right.
And, obviously the baseball team is much better at baseball, so Nasuno ends up getting Colonel Sanders to recruit actual professional baseball players from Japanese professional baseball who are depicted and named to win the match. And so that won me over, partly through my baseball fandom and partly just because it's a really funny parody of sports anime, which I'm always up for.
Well, I remember what made that joke even work was the fact you actually did research into that, and it was because, one of the funniest things about that was the fact that the baseball players he recruited were, decent players, but nobody who, was going to be, a huge name.
Well, yeah, they weren't even, by any stretch, the most famous Japanese baseball players.
Yeah, exactly.
The reference is funny because, the most famous baseball player is Ichiro Suzuki, and no, they went with, a catcher from a mid-tier Japanese team.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that sort of irreverence that's funny about it. Mm-hmm. I did enjoy the season closer of season 2 as well, where they go. It's the introduction of it's not her introduction. She had been in a couple other episodes before, but the character Kondo, where they go to her house, and apparently they have her family business is in udon, but it's a bowling alley as well where you bowl udon. And eventually they come up with the idea to make splash udon, and it becomes such a national phenomenon that eventually Japanese pundits have to start debating over whether or not it needs to be restricted in some way. Yeah. But what really made that episode to me was a completely off the just completely off kilter line where they're apparently you get free glasses of water with ordering their ramen, and apparently, whatever, but apparently Kanai is so impressed with the water because she can't stop drinking it. She's like, oh, it's so good!
Yeah, and that becomes a recurring joke that Konoe loves free water.
Right.
The next one I want to say was episode 45. The high school has a soccer match against a team with a zebra, and that's all I'm going to say about it.
That's fair. That's really all that needs to be said about it.
Right.
One of the, I believe the season, I think that season 5 opener was that they have a trip to, there's a 2-episode arc where they take a trip to Cambodia and they go see the Angkor Wat and everything. But probably the funniest thing about that is that they have it's episode 50 and 51, sorry. They take a trip to Cambodia, and their tour guide is so excited that he just shouts to them towards the end. It's like, are you effing enjoying the sights?
Yeah, and they actually bleep it out. It's just, it's so out of nowhere. I loved that.
Just the, out of nowhere extreme reaction, because there's not really, a lot of cursing in the show, weirdly enough.
No, not at all.
They don't go blue most of the time with their comedy.
Well, I mean, they talk a lot about eating underpants, but other than that...
Well, but yeah.
One of my... I'd say this is probably my second favorite episode overall, was episode 55. where the entire episode is spent where Konoe accidentally hits a guardrail on her bike, and then she swears vengeance against the guardrail, and they spend the rest of the episode arguing with a guardrail, which, you know, it sounds dumb. Just trust me, it works.
One I really enjoyed was it was in episode 68. It was a parody of Cinderella, which, I mean, you know, whatever. It's kind of cliche. But they kind of make it work because it's basically Yuri being Cinderella while she has over 200 stepsisters who are all Nasuno.
Right.
And there's one fantastic moment where Mario, being the prince, wants to, you know, fit the glass slipper on on all the girls in the land, and a guard states, "Are you absolutely insane?" And where he is promptly executed for his observation.
Yeah. Episode 73 stands out to me because they accidentally turned the tennis team into a well-digging club, but then everyone gets super into it and decides that they need to train at well-digging so they can go to nationals.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one, too. Probably my all-time favorite episode, and I'm pretty sure you agree with me on this, is episode 77, where they meet the bear.
Yep.
And they just talk with it's Marimo. It's Kanai and Yuri who just have a conversation with a local bear, and without going too much into it, he basically describes what it's like to be a bear and the awful stereotypes they face.
Yeah, it's special and deserves to be experienced.
Right.
And then the last one from the at least what is currently the final season is episodes 92 and 93. Which is a flashback about how Konoe, Marimo, and the guy from the 1,000 yen bill formed the tennis club at their high school.
Right.
Which, you know, who knows how much of it is true. This world clearly doesn't care. But it is a funny look at how these characters originated.
Right.
So for those of you keeping score at home, 10 great episodes to start with is 19, 21, 24, 45, 50, 55, 68, 73, 77, and 92. Any of those are, going to knock it out of the park. So wrapping up, Matt, overall, what is your impression of this series?
I like it a lot. I would probably rewatch it just like if I'm bored one day and just, you know, I need a quick laugh. Like this is probably not going to be the end of watching this for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, it's one of those where, like some of the episodes we mentioned along with some others, I would just skip through. You can enjoy the hits and then put it back down. You know, it's right. It's a quick, easy laugh. If they do release another season, we may not cover it on Koshien Cast because it turns out it's really not a sports anime. But I will probably watch it week to week for myself.
Oh yes, I might just wait until the end of the season and just kind of catch up. I did actually kind of like doing that myself. Yeah. But you know,
great ending, Matt. Well, with that in mind, again, just a reminder, you know. We do cover every sports anime week to week, so if you want to follow Koshien Cast, we follow every currently airing sports anime and some others, like Teekyu, along the way, so we have fun, and we assume our audience does too. With all that being said, Matt, would you be so good as to hit the credits for me?
It would be my absolute pleasure. Our logo design is by James Ratcliffe. The theme music is Fly High by Burnout Syndromes, covered and performed by Luke Bartka. You can follow Koshien Cast on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and our email is koshiencast@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We will be back next week with the best and worst from the world of sports anime, and until then, keep training.